Okay, so now we've got data types and variables. This is going to lead us into program number 3. So we're going to talk about data types and variables. So what is a variable? This is a really difficult, it's funny, this is a fairly simple concept, but it's also one that gets people stuck on. So this is very important to understand what a variable is. So a variable is basically a container. It is a place to store information. Okay, we're going to use variables a lot in our programs. That's the whole purpose of programming, is being able to use variables for different things. But a variable, you can think of it as a bucket, a basket, something where you put pieces of information to be stored for later use. Okay, or a place in memory allocated to where a variable is defined. Something that can be changed by the programmer or by the user. That's a good way to think of it. And variables can have different sizes and can be different types and can use different data types. So let's look at what we mean by all this. So let's say you want to have a program. So let's say you have a program that basically does 4 plus 5 equals something. It adds basically 4 plus 5, gives you the output of that. Is that program useful? No, it really isn't. All it's doing is basically adding 4 plus 5 gives you an output which is going to be 9 all the time. That is always going to be 9. That is not a useful program. It doesn't really do anything for you. What would be useful is if you could take any number plus any other number and add those together and figure that out. Now that's actually kind of useful. This is basically a program that would add two numbers together. But in order to do that, you need to be able to have a user enter in a number and then enter in another number and then output the sum of those two numbers somewhere. So what we have now, this here, that spot where we're going to store a number, and this spot where we're going to store another number, and this spot where we're going to possibly put the output, these would all be variables. And these are things we need to define in our program and then use them. So for example, we could say this is x plus y equals result. Variables, you can name them however you want. There's a couple of rules you need to follow, but you could do that, or you could say number 1 plus number 2 equals the output. Whatever you want to do, but basically you need to say we're going to have a number plus another number. It's going to give us an output. Now when we talk about data types, we need to define what these variables are and say what that number is. So if we're saying number 1 plus number 2 gives us an output, we're going to say, ask the user, okay, what is the value of number 1? What is the value of number 2? And then I'm going to return back to you the value of the output. What we need to do is say number 1, or this num1, that has to be a number. Number 2, num2, has to be a number. The output I'm going to give you is also going to be a number. What we can't do is we can't say, we can't have 3 plus cat equals what? You can't add that together. That's a number plus an animal gives you what. You can't add those two things together, right? You can only add a number plus another number. Okay, so this is where we get into data types. So we need to say, we need to actually define what those variables are going to be. So if it's going to be, you're using them in math, then they would need to be some type of number. If they're going to be some text strings that you're combining together, they would need to be string variables. Things like that. So we need to declare variables when we're going to use them, and we need to define what type they're going to be. Okay? So, different data types we're going to use in our programming. They're categorized by the name, the size, and the default value we're going to give them. The most common ones we're going to use, probably there's 4 that we're going to use. There's a lot of different data types. There's 4 we're going to use a lot. That would be integers, or INT stands for integer. An integer is basically a whole number. A Boolean, which is a 1 or a 0, a true or a false. A string, which is a string of text characters or alphanumeric characters. And a double, which is a number but a decimal number. So not a whole number but a fractional number. Like 2.68 would be a double. So lots of different data types showing here. Here's a table showing lots of different types. You can review this on your own. So here is our third program we're going to do. This is basically showing how we're going to define some variables and add two numbers together and then output a variable value to the screen. So this is basically defining 2 integers, x and y, assigning a value to each of them, and then outputting that value to the screen. Okay, so this is the program we're going to create right now. So I'm going to switch over to my programming software. I'm going to create a new project. This is going to be a console program. This is going to be, I have my location already defined. Program 3, call this variables. Always remember, got to put this at the top or else you're going to lose points. Can't spell my own name. Okay, we've got all that. I'm going to collapse this. Now, to define a variable, anytime we're going to use a variable, we need to define it. So, steps to defining it are saying what type it is. In this case, we're going to set 2 integers, x and y. So I'm just going to say int so integer x and integer y. So you can see how those are set up now. Now you'll see these have green squiggly lines under them right now. Now if I hover over this, it's going to give me a little message here. So if you have a green squiggly line under a variable, what that means is that this variable has been declared in your program, but it has not been used in your program. Now once I use this, this green squiggly line will go away. So this is just letting you know, hey, you've declared a variable, but you haven't used it at all. So the next thing we want to do is actually give a value to these. So we just do that by saying x is going to be equal to 3. Put a semicolon there, and now as you see, y is equal to 4. So now these variables have a value. So let's do this first. Actually, no, we're going to do this. We're going to say y is going to be equal to 4 plus x. So that is basically saying y is equal to 4 plus x. X was equal to 3, so y is now equal to 4 plus 3. So y is equal to 7. Okay, follow that. A little bit of math going on there. Just going to say and now what I want to do is output this to the screen. Console write line, and all I have to do here is just say y. Now you notice when I put in a y, this lights up, this lights up, and this lights up. That's everywhere that the y is actually being used in the program right now. And then console.read line. We'll just make the screen hold. Okay, so that's my program right now. So this right now should you can also do a comment like this just after the line. That might be a little bit easier. So that is how that works. So let's watch this run. So what this should do, it should write the number 7 on the screen. See if that works. And I get a 7 on the screen. That's real small. But that did work. Okay, so if I were to change anything here, like if I said, let's make this a 13. So now this should say 13, x is 13, so 4 plus 13 is going to be y. Write the value of y to the screen. So now we should get a 17 coming up on the screen. I get a 17. Or if I wanted to say, write the value of x to the screen, that should now give me a value of 13 coming up on the screen. Just like that. Now I'll show you one other thing here. See how we have x equals 13 here, defining a value for 13. You can also do this on one line up here. You can actually just say you can define the value as you define the variable. You can define an initial value for it. If you do that, that's the exact same thing. Alright, so this was my program. So that is the completed program for program 3. I'm going to run that. Whoops. That's supposed to say Y. Gives me a value of 7. And that's what I want to see when I save this. I'll do that over here. And then give me a screenshot of this. And I'm going to drop this screenshot into my Word file. So place that in my Word document. I have 3 programs in my Word document. Alright, and that is it for program 3.